Yes, this new announcement they make.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Annie. So, would you be able to just introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, of course. So yes, my name is Annie Bolger, and I am a native of upstate New York. So I lived in New York for first 20 years. And then I lived in Chicago for another 7 years, where I studied and met my other half. We moved to Leuven in Belgium to study at the Catholic University in the very end of 2015. And I've lived in Belgium and or the UK ever since then. So a bit of sort of back and forth that will emerge in the rest of the story probably. But have been in Europe for the last 5 years, and this year in curacy and lockdown. So.
Amazing. Is your chaplaincy in Leuven, where you're based at the moment?
Great question. Yes, I did my, if you will, the process of discernment in terms of discerning vocation and then going through the selection process. All of that took place in Leuven, and the chaplaincy in Leuven sponsored me as their ordinand and put me forward for the selection conference. I've just joined the chaplaincy in Brussels, so Holy Trinity Brussels, in July. And for the start of my curacy. So I began my curacy in a chaplaincy that was in lockdown that I hadn't been part of previously. So it's been really quite unusual circumstances to begin. Initially, we weren't meeting in the church building at all. So, and there have been little ups and downs in the COVID lockdown. So there have been some moments when I've been able to meet people who attend this chaplaincy, and I've met a lot of people on Zoom and over the phone, but very much looking forward to being able to worship together in person, because there are so many marvelous people here that I haven't actually gotten to meet yet. So so I'm located in Brussels now, and just really looking forward to gaining that sense of having arrived, because it sort of feels like a limbo period in between having been in training and in Leuven and coming here.
Of course. So before ordination, you might still be in this role, but before, you're calling to the ordination track, what were you doing? What was your job? I guess it might still be applicable because some are, but
yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I worked. So after I did my BA in Chicago, I worked for some time in various areas, mostly related to communications. For a period of time, I had a project management role in a media and communications department, and I was actually training for an editorial role in print media when we decided to sort of uproot and move to Leuven. So my editorial background actually became quite useful when we lived in Leuven, because I was able to do that as a freelance editor. And our intention had been this was sort of our European adventure. We were coming to Leuven for a year, and then we were moving back to the US, and I was going to resume my career. Really, that was the intention all along. Evidently, there were other plans that unfolded And I had sensed a calling, a vocation to ministry, and wasn't exactly sure where that would be expressed when I arrived in Belgium. And really wonderfully, we landed in this chaplaincy, St. Martha and St. Mary's, where there was such an openness and warm-heartedness to accompanying people who were interested in discerning vocation. So one thing led to another, and I continued to support myself as an editor while I studied theology at the Catholic University and discerned in the Church of England. And it wasn't until I was actually accepted into training that I set aside the editing work, and I wasn't terribly sad to do that in a lot of ways. I'm a happy editor, but this is a very fulfilling calling. So yeah, and I think that those skills, they do come in handy from time to time in terms of checking church communications or updating websites for churches. Hopefully they come in handy in sermon writing and so forth. But yeah, that was my previous life before I started this.
Amazing. So when you were in the US, what was the sort of trigger to moving to Belgium?
A lot of it had to do with actually my husband's education. So while I was working as the training to become an editor, he was finishing his MA in philosophy. And the idea we had for our lives at that point was that I would continue working and he would apply to a PhD program. But actually, he didn't receive the funding that was necessary for a PhD in the US. So his supervisor at the time mentioned Leuven to him and said, my husband has an interest in continental philosophy. Europe is the best place to study that. And Leuven's quite a wonderful philosophy institution. So anyway, he was given advice to take a year and do a master in philosophy. And then, of course, we thought after that, then we would reapply to the PhD programs in the US and go back. And one thing led to another. And I was the one who really wanted to stay in Leuven to continue my discernment process. So he's actually doing his PhD at the university in Leuven. So rather than going back to the US, we were able to just kind of stay alongside each other in parallel, which was really marvelous. Yeah, so it was just meant to be a temporary stop, and now it's home.
More permanent. Yeah. Amazing. So when did you first feel the nudge to ordination, and how did you get from there to where you are today?
Yes. I think the nudge probably reaches very, very far back. I've had the privilege of being raised in a Christian home and having a very deep sense from an early age of the love of Christ, very profound sense of that. I didn't grow up in a tradition in which women were church leaders. And so that wasn't really a role I had ever pictured for myself. And I knew even in my teenage years, I really wanted to serve God. but it wasn't, it just wasn't part of my imagination to serve in this kind of a capacity. So I ended up studying Christian mission as in the Department of Missions at a Bible college, and thought my path would be along those lines. However, when I was in my early 20s, I had quite a crisis of health, and I think what some people would call the dark night of the soul, St. John of the Cross would say. For me, what emerged in that time was I had a few experiences of really meaningful accompaniment by hospital chaplains, one of whom was a woman who remains part of my life today. She's still a mentor to me, but at the time was a very tangible presence of Christ in my life. And I really thought that this is what I would like to be able to do. I'd like to be able to do something similar to the ministry that she exercised. So that's kind of when the first inkling emerged in terms of looking at ordination and seeing if that was a way in which I could express that love of Christ, which again has always been very resonant, very real in my life, and also be able to serve God's people. So I put it all to the back of my head because it didn't fit into the life plans that we had going at the time. I was happy in my work. As I mentioned, Jacob was happy and pursuing his education. So it didn't seem like the right time to kind of take up something new. And really it was that move, the physical relocation to Europe, that kind of broke things open and gave me an opportunity to try something else. And so it was all rather unexpected in many ways. And well, I'll leave it at that for now. But there were lots of little things along the way, of course, which you can't get into the weeds. But one of the really significant things was in arriving in Leuven and meeting the priest who at the time was the priest in St. Martha and St. Mary's, who had in some ways very analogous experiences and crisis of health, and was able to kind of see the gift in that, and see the gift in that experience of brokenness, and how that can be a gift in ministry.
Amazing. It must have been quite a journey, going from a tradition where women weren't in leadership or weren't in leadership, to then discovering a woman who was by your side in health, and then to now you stepping into a leader role. How has that been, that journey?
Yes, it is a profound thing. For one, just on the surface, there was a lot of growth that had to take place for me, a lot of expansion of my perspectives, and if you will, a sort of a willingness to take some risks, because that's, the community I come from wouldn't recognize this vocation in women. So there are risks that come with that. And for a journey which is profoundly personal, it's also profoundly public, because vocations are not for ourselves merely. They are gifts to the church. They're gifts to all of God's people. And so, yeah, I think for me, it was it was a very touching experience to arrive in a new context where that was so incredibly affirming and willing to look together with any person, whether they have a vocation, regardless of their identity. That was really liberating, and there was just a process of sort of growing and flourishing in that environment. And I would say that there have been pains along the way as well, because there are people that can't accompany you on the journey. There are people for whom that's hard or confusing, and they're not able to bring them alongside. And I think that's something a lot of women in ministry experience, and others too, people whose families maybe aren't religious, who find the whole thing puzzling. What are you doing, and why are you doing it? So I know that's quite a shared experience, and I've been really fortunate to know some other people who've had similar bumps along the way, and been really good resources for me, really good supports, including actually that hospital chaplain who I referred to earlier. For her as well, her emerging vocation wasn't entirely welcomed and affirmed. And I saw in her just a resilience and a conviction, a real sense of conviction that this calling costs so much that if it wasn't authentic, if it hadn't really been tested and tried, it would have been easier to set aside.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's something compelling to about that, and about meeting with some resistance. It's not a bad thing. It can be a really important point of growth, I think. Yeah.
How did you hear of the diocese in Europe or the Anglican Church in Melbourne?
Yes. So, diocese in Europe I had never heard of before arriving here. I did a very simple Google search for Anglican churches in Belgium before we moved. And we were actually surprised to see that there were any. I was aware that the Anglican Communion was global, but I just sort of assumed, because Belgium is really a Catholic country, I didn't think that there would be chaplaincies here. So it was a pretty delightful surprise to see that there was one that was local to where we were going to be, and also there were several others scattered across Belgium. But it truly wasn't until we arrived and met with the priest here that we began to understand the scope of the diocese in Europe and all of the ecumenical relationships that are maintained by this diocese. We didn't have any idea, really. And similarly, it was a learning curve again, because I come from the US, where the Episcopal Church is the province in the United States, which is not the church I grew up in, but would be the expression of Anglicanism I'm most familiar with. So it was also a learning curve to then train in the UK, in the Church of England in England, having my port of entry be the diocese in Europe. So there were several layers of culture shock along the way. The diocese in Europe, for instance, in my experience, many people would have a similar biography to mine, coming from another place and possibly either another province of the Anglican Communion, or maybe not the Anglican Church at all. Whereas in England, it's very different to that. You have more cradle Anglicans. So yeah, that was a big learning curve, and realizing that my experience is quite different to mainstream experiences in the Church of England, but it's also quite enriching. It's a different perspective, and it's quite an important perspective, I think. So
yes,
yeah.
You must have quite a big exposure to different church backgrounds and church traditions, or none at all, as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think being in the United States in particular, where there is no established church, it's much more common for people to have quite a mixed heritage in terms of churches, to have gone to lots of different kinds of, visited many denominations, or have been part of different denominations. So you see people emerging into adulthood often with a variety of experiences behind them, and then making a choice based on those experiences. Whereas in England, it's, if I met a Methodist, they had been a Methodist their whole life. If I met a Baptist, they'd been a Baptist their whole life. So it's strange for someone like me to share my pedigree, so to speak, just all mixed and all over the place. Not quite as relatable sometimes.
Amazing. Are there any particular areas of ministry which you feel God has called you to in particular? So that might be youth ministry, or women's ministry, or chaplaincy.
Yeah, really. At the moment, my answer would be that I think at the moment, I'm just called to where I am now, which is still curacy. So I feel I'm in a discovery stage, as well as a process of formation. I'm still very much learning. So this first year has been my diaconal year. I'm a deacon presently. God willing, would be ordained priest in July. And for me, that's what I'm most looking forward to, is just being able to step into that sacramental role as a priest, and be able to celebrate the Eucharist. It's kind of as much as I can get my mind wrapped around at the moment. There are always there's this lingering attraction to hospital chaplaincy, in part because that was the door into all of this vocational exploration. And I did, while I was still in theological college in Mirfield, I did an extensive placement in an NHS hospital chaplaincy, and it was marvelous. I had a really incredible experience there. So that remains, that's in the back of my mind. I have a great desire to be in parish ministry. So sometimes those things are competing. You know, being a chaplain can be one full-time role. Being a parish priest can be one full-time role. Sometimes they can converge. And I'm curious to see in the future if that would be possible to do something alongside. And then there's the bit of me that is, I really enjoy the challenge of studying theology and in being in contexts of teaching and learning theology. So yeah, I think if there were ever an opportunity to be involved in formation, whether that's through accompanying people in discernment or somehow being attached to, yeah, the opportunity to train people. That sounds very ambitious for someone who's just starting out, but I feel that I'm a person who's been invested in so much, and it would be really exciting to be able to do that with other people and for other people. So yeah, lots of different exciting prospects in the future. But for now, the very near future feels very exciting and very weighty and profound. So I'm also just happy to be where I am at this stage.
Amazing. So obviously this year has, as a curate, has not been probably how you ever imagined it to have gone. How has this experience of being a curate in a pandemic been for you?
I would be, I'd be remiss not to say it's been really hard. It's been really hard. There isn't anything really in terms of formation and preparation with regard to how to minister in a church that's not a gathered community. That wasn't really part of anyone's idea of what curacy would look like. So I've found that to have kind of knocked me off balance. And the comfort, I suppose, is that it seems to have done that for a lot of experienced clergy as well. So it's not just a matter of being new and inexperienced. It's also that there's this enormous challenge to everyone to re-envision what it is to be a gathered community in isolation. So yeah, I've found it really hard. I think that there are some skills I've gained that will probably be useful forever, because I imagine hybrid worship, for instance, that's something that will stay with us. We're now more aware, thankfully, of the many people who never could access our churches and never could come through the doors. And by being available online, we've expanded really the people who can be included. So I think that's here to stay. And I'm really glad that I've honed some of those skills of preaching into a camera and putting together a liturgy that is sensible and participatory even from home. But I just really am looking forward to emerging from lockdown and to be able to truly do hybrid worship, where we have the sense of including all those who are with us virtually and also being together to some extent. I also some of the things I was looking forward to in this year in terms of getting to observe marriage preparations, observe baptism preparations. Those things haven't been able to happen because you can't be together with people, and most people who can postpone their weddings have done so, things like that. So some of the more pastoral ministry of being with people that I was looking forward to hasn't been able to happen. And then I think there's a kind of weariness and a fatigue that has set in. It's not exceptional. It's not just for me. It feels like everyone sort of has this malaise, experiencing a kind of malaise. And it's quite hard to maintain energy and enthusiasm when you're doing that all for yourself, kind of on your own. Very conscious of how much we actually need to be with each other to feed off of one another's energy, to even be able to read and understand one another. So yeah, I've found it super hard, and I think all of us have been thrown back on ourselves and thrown back on our own inner resources. And maybe that's something I'll take with me into the future. I'm very aware that my curacy is unique in the sense of I work with quite a number of people in ministry in this church. There are many lay ministers, there are pastoral workers, interns, youth worker, other clergy, and so many volunteers. There's just a large number of people. But in fact, that's unusual. The average parish priest is sort of not working with so many colleagues. And so maybe that opportunity in the year to fall back on those inward resources will be something valuable to take into the future. Hopefully not into another situation like this, but into the realities of what parish ministry can be like. Can be sometimes a bit lonely, I think. And this year will have been good preparation for that.
You've mentioned a couple of things like pastoral care, some of the sacramental sacramental parts of ministry. Are there any parts of ministry that you're really excited and really looking forward to as restrictions begin to ease across Europe?
Yes, I'm, first of all, the most pressing thing, I suppose the most imminent opportunity would be to celebrate the Eucharist. And that is a huge aspect of the calling that I feel, and to be able to be in the midst of God's people as both an icon and a shepherd to God's people in that act of celebrating the Eucharist together. That just sort of beyond imagining the privilege of that, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'd say I'm also really looking forward to, I haven't baptized anyone, and I'm really looking forward to being able to do that. Yeah, most people have sort of postponed their babies' baptisms until family can be present, of course. And we now have sort of a backlog of baptisms that are waiting to happen. And I'm looking forward to being able to do that for the first time. But other things I think are a lot less glamorous. I'm looking forward to things like being able to have coffee with people again. We technically can. We can go on walks outdoors and we can meet in parks. We've just had terraces reopen in Belgium, so we can have a meal with someone. But I think, after the service ends on a Sunday, those small interactions that we have with one another, when we're just having cake and tea, those are really, really important to our life as a community and becoming brothers and sisters. And so I'm really looking forward to being able to do those little things. Just the small conversation here and there with a community that I am still very much getting to know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to coffee.
How are you feeling on the lead up to the actual ordination day? And are there any particular parts of the ordination day that you're looking forward to? Or, yeah, how are you feeling about the actual day itself?
Yes. Yeah, I am really looking forward to it. What in particular, though? I'm trying to think. Yes, I think the thing I'm looking forward to most is being able to, after the service ends, I hope that I'll be able to locate my husband somewhere in the church and be able to give him my first blessing as a priest. And I really feel like that will be a very profound, possibly emotional experience. He's been such a tremendous support. I talked about how my imagination has had to expand over the years in order to envision this kind of calling in my life. And I'd have to say, I don't think that would have been possible without his vision expanding. And he saw me in this vocation before I did. And the way he kind of helped call that forth from me, and the way he's been just an amazing support, accommodating lots of time away, lots of demands on my time, and always celebrating the journey I've been on. So I want to be able to have that moment where I'm able to bless him. Other things I'm looking forward to, this year, hopefully it will be streamed and my family will be able to watch from afar. And I'm really looking forward to imagining that they're joining in. And yeah, I think last year we weren't able to really have any kind of celebration afterward because the restrictions were much more serious. And this year we are permitted to be outdoors with small gatherings. So hoping to be able to kind of party with some friends and actually celebrate that this has happened, because the deaconing seemed to kind of come and go in a very subdued way, a very subdued lockdown kind of way. And Oh my goodness, we've all just had a year where we haven't been able to party. So I hope that that after the service, we'll just go outside and pop champagne corks and just celebrate this amazing gift. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Me?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I'm trying to think if there's anything. Hmm. Well, I suppose, yeah, I think I would probably add just a mention of thanks to the people who've accompanied me along the way, especially because I know this will be used perhaps for the diocese in Europe. The diocese in Europe is, I think, a really special place. At least in my experience, the ability to perceive in people who don't quite necessarily fit the average profile of a Church of England priest, to be able to perceive gifts in people who are from other cultures, other backgrounds, other linguistic families, and to imagine the calling of God in all of God's people. And I think the diocese in Europe is pretty uniquely situated to be able to do that, and certainly has done that in my experience. So I think I'd just add a word of gratitude for having been able to go on this journey within this diocese, and now be able to serve my curacy here as well, which took a great deal of effort and ingenuity on the part of the diocese also, to be able to provide a curacy here. So I just feel, yeah, incredibly humbled and thankful. So if there's any way to kind of take that and turn it into something usable, that would be great.
Of course. Thank you, Annie. I will end the recording.